Hi, I'm Josh Rushing, filling in for Femi OK, and you are in the stream. Today, do no harm. It's the main tenet of the Hippocratic Oath. But what happens when doctors have to navigate a system that can prevent them from putting patients first? Today, we'll explore what some are calling a public health emergency in the U.S. Doctors who are so burned out that they're quitting, or worse, killing themselves in shocking numbers. Why is the system letting doctors and patients down? Are you a medical professional? We want to hear from you. Join the conversation in our live YouTube chat. 2 doctors have already sent us their thoughts. Here, take a look.
Doctors have the highest suicide rate of any profession. I run a doctor suicide hotline, and I've investigated more than 1,300 doctor suicides. Root cause analysis reveals human rights violations as the culprit. Doctors who don't succumb to suicide are victims too. Coping with abuse is not a solution. Ending abuse is. Injured morals offers no solution. Burnout is just a smokescreen. Human rights violations are killing doctors and patients. Let's focus on facts and real solutions.
So when the insurance company calls and says that they're not going to pay for the medication that you've prescribed, or when a hospital administrator says you must discharge your patient today, obviously these are examples that affect your ability to provide good patient care, but they also come to you as if you've made the wrong decision, and that can be felt as an attack.
So get this. Every year, more than 1 million Americans lose their doctor to suicide. Now, traditionally in the U.S., doctors have been viewed as noble, well-paid, really the peak of success. So what happened? Why are so many doctors so deeply unhappy? A 2018 opinion piece on this topic received a surprising response. In it, 2 doctors argued that medical professionals were experiencing a kind of damage to their moral code. They know how to best care for their patients, but are blocked by systemic barriers related to the business side of healthcare, leaving them to ask, what comes first, patients or profits? We're joined by one of the authors of that piece, Dr. Wendy Dean. She's a psychiatrist by training and co-founder of Moral Injury of Healthcare. Dr. Jill Weiner is a physician and founder of Meditation in Medicine. And Dr. Gabe Charbonneau is a family physician and creator of Fight Burnout. All right, thanks for joining me on the program. Wendy, first what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to tweet out your article for our audience. Don't read it now, watch the show, but you guys can check that out right after the show. Wendy, doctors have the highest suicide rate of any profession in the U.S. What's going on?
So I think that physicians are trying, they've come into this profession as a calling. And they knew that it was going to be hard when they got into it. They knew it was going to be long hours. They knew that they were going to sacrifice a lot in their adult lives. And then what happens is when they leave medical school, they take an oath to put their patients first as a priority. And as they get out into practice, they realize that they can't just take their patients first as the priority. Sometimes they have to consider what the insurance company needs, what the electronic medical record needs, what their hospital or healthcare system needs. And every time they have to choose other than their patient as a priority, they sustain a moral distress. And when those amass, day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year, they amass into a moral injury. And it causes physicians to really wonder, how can I maintain my own moral compass and continue to work in a system that asks me to do these things that don't put my patient at the top of my mind?
Wendy, what was the response to your piece? It came out about a year ago, a little over a year ago, right?
It did. It came out in July of 2018. Mm-hmm. And really, it had been for us a thought experiment. We had talked to our friends who had told us that they were very unhappy, but that burnout didn't really fit what they were experiencing. Mm-hmm. And so we put this idea of moral injury in healthcare out as a thought experiment and really didn't anticipate the avalanche of response that we would get to it. So the original article has had 275,000 downloads. It was the 3rd most read article last year, even though it was published in 2018. Wow. And so we've gotten hundreds of emails, and I've gotten multiple phone calls, and the typical response from people is, thank you for giving me the language that I've been looking for the last decade or two to really name what my experience has been.
And speaking of the language, Gabe, I want to go to you. What do you think about using this framing, moral injury, for what doctors in the U.S. are experiencing?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. I really want to start by saying that, Wendy and I are on the same side of this issue. It's doctors and patients that are suffering. And so the language, whatever we use, needs to be tools to help us get to a better place. And so I really believe there's a place for both burnout and for moral injury. And so I do sometimes get frustrated when people say it's not burnout or it's not burnout, it's moral injury. The reason for that is that burnout has been researched for a very long time. We have evidence-based interventions. We have validated tools for tracking it and seeing how it's going, but it doesn't answer everything. Moral injury has some things to offer and to help people understand what's happening that's different from burnout. So I think both need to exist so that we can get to this better place that we're looking for.
And Jill, and I just want to say for the audience here, actually, I asked everyone before the show, they're all doctors. They should be referred to as doctors. They all gave me permission to use their first name for the ease of today's conversation. But I want to take the conversation now to Jill, who's sitting in Atlanta, Georgia. You're a physician, a doctor. Did you experience a kind of burnout? What did you go through? And does moral injury ring true for your personal experiences?
So I had burnout several times throughout my career, and burnout was always the language that I knew, so this is how I tell my story. Although I do definitely agree with a lot of the philosophy and truth behind using the term moral injury. For me, in 2011, I got severe burnout, and I was crying every day, and one little thing would go wrong, and I would just snap and have to leave my office. And I remember looking next to my colleague. I was a hospitalist, which meant I took care of patients who were hospitalized in the hospital, and so I didn't have a private practice where my patients would come and see me in a physical office. And so I turned to my colleague and I said, "We hate this job, right? This is horrible." And she said, "No, it's a great job. We're fine." And so for me, that's when I knew there was something inside of me that wasn't responding well to my current work situation. And then I learned this meditation practice. So I'm on the show today because I have, in 2015, left my clinical practice to teach meditation and other stress reduction modalities to healthcare professionals. For me, meditation helped me. So for me, it was all internal. But I do also relate to a lot of the struggles of, get your patients discharged from the hospital, but don't have high readmission rates, and get good patient satisfaction scores, but also make sure that you're not overprescribing opiates or antibiotics, and don't use good decisions when ordering tests, but also also try not to get sued. So there are a lot of conflicting things that are put on us as doctors that people don't understand. And I think there is this sense, as you were saying, Josh, that doctors had this highly esteemed profession. We're all human and we're not perfect. And I don't think we deserve to be treated like gods at all. But I also feel that there is a lot of stuff that doctors have to go through on a day-to-day basis that people just don't realize.
I wonder if people feel like, or if doctors feel like, that they don't have the right to complain because of where they're seen as esteemed, or by what they get paid, or by their education level. I'm looking at our YouTube chat, which is pretty hot right now. This guy named Hawa Ahmed, and he says, no wonder I hate going to the doctor, that some of them seem so depressed. You can feel it in their offices. Wendy, I was thinking, you wrote another article where, from the perspective of the patient, and can you share a little bit about or at least your husband was the patient. Can you share a little bit about that experience and what it told you about what doctors are going through?
Right. So in 2016, my husband he has a longstanding heart condition that he was born with, and it had been very well managed for years. And at the end of 2016 and into the beginning of 2017, he started to decompensate. And during the course of that illness, which became a critical illness, what we experienced was a complete disengagement of the physicians who were taking care of him. And it was very difficult for us to contact the physicians. When he was very critical, it was hard to get them to engage in and to feel the sense of urgency that we had about getting him transferred. And a lot of it fell to me as an advocate for his care to to make sure that he got the care that he needed without the engagement of the people that I felt should be his advocates, who were the physicians. And what I realized was these folks were tied in knots, and they couldn't refer outside of their system, I think, without suffering some consequences of their own. And they knew that they weren't taking the best care of patients, or that they weren't being effective. And it was so disheartening and frankly frightening to watch them disengage from us. The sicker my husband got, the more disengaged they became. And that's fine for me because I'm a physician. I understand how the healthcare system works. But we had such a near miss that I started worrying about, what about my friends and neighbors who don't have that same ability to advocate from a position of being, an insider or well-educated in how healthcare works?
Can someone, maybe Gabe, talk to me? How does the business side of this play into it?
Yeah. So this actually ties into a little bit of what I like about burnout as a term is that there is an antidote, which if you look at the research, professional fulfillment is what Dr. Maslach calls that. And there are these 6 different things that fall into that category that need to happen. And so one of them is you need a reasonable workload. And the physician workload has just skyrocketed in recent years. So the EHR, a lot of people point a finger there for good reason. The studies that have come out that show that we spend enormous amounts of time doing documentation and administrative work in the EHR, and that was something that hasn't always been around. So there's more work to be done with the same amount of hours in the day, and so that's a real issue. And so there are some other issues with professional fulfillment too. So lack of control. So a lot of physicians have become employed in recent years, and I don't think we realized when we were making the transition from a lot of us from private practice into employment how much control we were giving up, and that's a big factor in the burnout literature for what leads to burnout is lost control.
Well,
I think,
Gabe, can you distinguish for me what you see the difference between burnout and moral injury are?
I actually am so new to moral injury that I would actually prefer that Wendy speak about moral injury, but I can happily tell you about burnout. So burnout is exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, depersonalization. So what Wendy was describing with her husband, he probably wasn't being seen as a full human being like he would have if the doctor wasn't burned out, and lost sense of accomplishment. So you just are not accomplishing in your work what you think you should be or what you really should be.
Jill, it looked like you wanted to jump in there.
And
sure, yeah. I think one of the things that I feel like there's this either or, like, are you team burnout or are you team moral injury? And I don't think it
right.
from anyone on this show. Wendy, I've read your article and I think it's amazing. And Gabe, I've looked at your work as well. But there's this sense of like, because moral injury now exists, now doctors can stay mad and blame something else and say, okay, it's not me, it's the system. So then I can just like be mad and unhappy until the system gets fixed. And that's where I come in, because I feel like no matter how bad the system is, even if the system was perfect, you're still taking care of sick patients. You're still having to deliver bad news. You still have to stay on top of the medical literature. It's stressful and it's scary. And we should promote a culture where we're able as physicians and other healthcare professionals to take care of ourselves in a way that let us show up for ourselves, show up for our patients, and then show up in a healthier way so we can come up with solutions to the healthcare system that are not out of stress mode and survival mode, but that are in a place where our brains are rested and we're able to make good decisions and solve problems and communicate better. Because people get so angry. I've seen a lot of really angry videos online about moral injury, and it's striking a chord. So it has a lot of merit, but it's so angry that I feel like it's for me, it's frustrating because I'm not sure it's helping with solutions.
Hey, Wendy, can I throw a comment to you out of our YouTube group? It's
Absolutely.
from someone named, I think, Dalen Jones. It says moral injury is a military term. Doctors cannot expropriate the term. The internal pressure of dealing human beings, I'm not sure, but doctors have a choice, soldiers don't. What do you think?
right? So I think it's very much akin to what happened with the language around post-traumatic stress disorder, where it did originate in the military for good reason. And there was much debate about whether or not that same categorization could be applied to civilians. But I think we've shown that even though it comes from very different drivers or from different directions, that PTSD is an appropriate diagnosis in the military. It's also appropriate diagnosis in the civilian population who have suffered trauma. And I think moral injury in the military population certainly is a valid one. But I think that there are some aspects of the healthcare system and the position that physicians are in that we can also agree will transgress deeply held moral beliefs. And so getting back to Jill's point that I absolutely agree that meditation and doing all the self-care that keeps us strong enough to go back and change this system is critical. That is our baseline. And that's something that we should be doing. It's necessary, but I don't think it's sufficient for us to change the drivers of moral injury. And to Gabe's point, with the difference between burnout and moral injury, there are lots of things that can drive moral injury that will, that can drive burnout. Burnout is a cluster of symptoms, and there are many things that can feed into that. But I think what we've heard in the 18 months since we published our article is that moral injury is a big segment of that, of the causes.
So you're talking about causes. I'd also like to talk about solutions. Jill, definitely want to talk about meditation with you. Before you do, though, we have a couple of comments from some doctors in our community. Can we roll those?
We work up to, if not more than 80 hours a week, sometimes for months on end without weekends off. Patients are then faced with doctors who are exhausted, who want to check every lab, who want to follow up on every exam finding and listen to every patient problem. But there often is not the time and space for that to occur, leading to errors and thus cyclical worsening of moral injury. We need more residents. We need more time off between shifts to recover. We need formal training on dealing with inevitable bad outcomes. We need a lot of change to improve moral injury in medicine.
However, as far as solutions, I have 3 ideas. 1, making step 1 pass-fail, which will reduce the burden of step 1 on medical trainees early in their careers. 2, making the primary clinical year pass-fail, which will shift the burden of performance and evaluations to the 4th and final year of medical school, when students are much more familiar with clinical work and they know what they want to go into. And last, increasing avenues for therapy and residency, and specifically ensuring that these services are covered by training programs.
Now, it's worth noting both those comments came from either medical students or young doctors. But I guess my question is, and I'm going to send this to you, Jill, and then we can talk about meditation as a way to respond to it. But do doctors begin their career burned out coming out of medical school?
The data I've read and heard about is that they go into medical school not burnt out, and then they come out of it already having experienced some sort of damage or trauma or whatever we call it. I had my first burnout my 2nd year of med school, so I was maybe ahead of the pack on that front. So I think that there's a culture in medicine that we are not. There's this expression that we say, strong work. Like the harder you work, the earlier you get there, the later you stay, the more intense you are, the more you come in when you're sick, then you're like a strong resident or a strong student. And so there's this culture that's perpetuated that the more you give of yourself and don't allow yourself to breathe and to heal, that somehow makes you better. And that is perpetuated, I think, and Wendy and Gabe, you may have also your own experience with this. I feel like that's perpetuated throughout medical education. And I don't know where it starts and where it ends, but I feel like we need to get to it at the very beginning to change the culture.
Well, Jill, you remind me of the character in W. Somerset Maugham's novel Razor's Edge, Larry Darrell. He ends up going to India after a war. He comes back from the war really morally injured, but they didn't have those words back then. I think it was World War I. And he ends up in India kind of searching for peace or some solution. You did the same thing, right? What did you find? You found meditation.
I did. I found meditation in 2011 when I was still practicing medicine. And it really, for me, it's not mindfulness. So what I practice and what I teach is very different from your traditional workplace mindfulness hour-long guided visualization. So I took this meditation course in 2011, and I had really profound benefits really quickly. I lost my road rage. I stopped crying every day. And I was quite successful in my academic and clinical career for several years after that. It was when I went to India for a retreat, a meditation retreat, and I started having some really, really even more powerful experiences, because I was never spiritual or open to meditation. If you had people that know me now or that knew me then think it's hilarious that I'm a meditation teacher now, because I was the type of med student to go out and overindulge in alcohol and study and party. I was not a self-care kind of medical student. So when I started to have these experiences and realized that even type A anxious doctors like me could meditate successfully and enjoy it, that made me think, what would happen if I became a teacher? And I always just assumed that I'd come back to medicine and teach part-time and practice medicine part-time. So it was never like, I'm leaving medicine because I can't handle it or because I hate it. I just realized I had this tool that could help wonderful people get to the point where I had gotten.
Jill, are you on Twitter?
Yeah, I am.
Put your Twitter handle out there right now. I think a lot of people might want to be picking up what you're laying down.
Sure, it's
So can I make a comment about meditation, because I have some thoughts that I'd love to share.
Yeah. Sure. Jill, we'll tweet out your Twitter. I'll tweet it out. Go ahead, Gabe.
So first of all, I practice meditation regularly. I took an MBSR class 2 years ago, and it changed my life. And I think it's a tremendously valuable tool. I also have concerns about what exactly the role of it is in helping with the burnout epidemic. So, for example, this gets back to like our language that we use to understand what's going on. So if the model is burnout, then really the research shows that the antidote is professional fulfillment. And we've got this thing going now where there are programs which I think are very good programs, like the WellMD program at Stanford, and that we're talking about wellness like it is the antidote to burnout. But wellness is not the true opposite of burnout. Professional fulfillment is the opposite of burnout. And so I think that meditation is extraordinarily important. It gives me reserves I don't have without it. But I'm afraid that I'm just not sure that it solves the burnout epidemic. I don't know where meditation falls into answering the questions about professional fulfillment. What does that do to reduce my workload? What does that do to increase my control? What does that do to increase the sense of fairness that I have about work? What does that do to give me more rewards at work? Those are a few of the professional fulfillment categories.
I only got about 90 seconds left, and I want to give Jill a chance to respond to that, because I'm curious to hear her answer.
I think that's a great question, Gabe, and I don't think meditation will fix all of it. I think there's systemic issues, and professional fulfillment is a huge part of it. Meditation, I feel like, is a high-performance tool, so it's not just about stress management and feeling good, but it makes your brain function better. It gets you out of stress overdrive. It helps you with problem solving. I have students who have better clinical judgment because of it, improved compassion, better intuition. So there's so many other tools that come to it. It's a huge tool, but it's not the only tool for burnout. Absolutely. And I just think that having a bunch of people in the right.
So I think that the meditation piece is actually exactly what you said. It is a high performance tool that will prepare you or leave you the best prepared to tackle the drivers of moral injury or burnout.
All right, guys, look, I'm going to have to start to wrap this up. And the problem is, I want to show this tweet on my computer where someone tweeted, said, single payer, Medicare for all. The answer is simple. And the problem with meditation is it's an individual thing. And I wanted to get to talk more about the system, what needs to happen in the system here. But we're going to have to wrap it. So Doctors Wendy Dean, Jill Weiner, Gabe Charbonneau, I want to thank you for being on the program. But let's continue this conversation on Twitter after the show. And for everyone watching, I'll see you next time.